They called it a weed, a pest, an invasive nuisance choking the pastureland, stealing water from cattle, breaking the roots of good grass. Ranchers poisoned it by the acre. Government programs funded its removal. Bulldozers were brought in. Herbicides were applied from aircraft. For decades, the United States spent millions of dollars trying to kill a tree that had kept people alive for 10,000 years. That contradiction has never been resolved. It has only been forgotten. The mesquite tree does not look like salvation. It does not rise tall or grow straight. It twists, it sprawls, it sends its roots down 30, sometimes 50 feet into the earth, searching for water in places no other plant will reach. Its bark is rough and dark. Its canopy is spare. It offers shade, but not much. It offers wood, but it burns slow and hot, which is exactly what you need when the temperature outside is 110 degrees Fahrenheit, and you cannot afford to waste fuel. It does not look like a food system. It is one of the oldest food systems on this continent. And what cannot be owned, it seems, cannot survive. This is Ancient Food Files, a channel dedicated to recovering what was buried, what was discarded, what was made inconvenient. We do not speculate, we excavate. If you find value in what survives here, consider subscribing. This archive grows slowly and with intention. Now, open the record. The Sonoran Desert, the Chihuahuan Basin, the Lower Rio Grande. These are not places that invite settlement. The sun is a presence here, physical, constant, without apology. Rain comes in bursts or not at all. The soil is alkaline and pale. Summers kill. And yet, people did not merely survive here. They stayed, they built, they raised children and buried their elders, and told stories about where they came from and what the land owed them, and what they owed the land back. The Oldum people, once called the Pima and the Papago by those who arrived later and named everything twice, had a word for the time of year when mesquite pods ripened. They organized their calendar around it, not because it was convenient, because it was essential. They called the pod harvest a time of coming together. Extended families who had dispersed across the desert in small groups throughout the dry months would reunite when the mesquite flowered. They would camp beneath the trees. They would harvest the pods by hand, dry them in the sun, grind them into flour with stone mortars. The grinding itself was a social act, women working together, songs emerging from the rhythm of stone on stone. This was not foraging in the way it is sometimes romanticized. This was agriculture without fields, management without ownership, a food system designed by 10,000 years of intimacy with a specific landscape. The mesquite was not a backup plan, it was the plan. To understand why mesquite survived where everything else failed, you have to understand what it is at the level of biology. Prosopis juliflora, Prosopis glandulosa, Prosopis velutina. There are over 40 species of mesquite worldwide, distributed across the desert regions of the Americas, Africa, and Asia. All of them share a fundamental adaptation, a taproot system of almost violent determination. Where a wheat plant roots at 3 feet, mesquite roots at 50. Where a corn plant wilts at 2 weeks without rain, mesquite continues its work, quietly, without visible distress, for months. There are documented specimens whose roots have reached the water table at depths no agricultural crop could approach. The tree is a nitrogen fixer. Its roots host bacteria that pull nitrogen from the air and deposit it directly into the soil. In a desert ecosystem already stripped of nutrients, the mesquite does not merely survive, it builds the conditions for other plants to survive around it. It creates its own microclimate. It is what ecologists now call a keystone species, and what the Oodum simply called the tree. The pods it produces are extraordinary by any measure. They contain between 20 and 30% sugar, concentrated, naturally occurring, slow to metabolize. The protein content rivals many legumes. The fiber is dense and soluble. Ground into flour, mesquite meal produces a naturally sweet, low-glycemic food with a nutty, caramel complexity that requires no refinement, no additives, no processing beyond what a stone can accomplish. It is a complete food in the most literal sense. It sustained populations through droughts that lasted decades. It did not fail when the rains failed. It did not require irrigation. It did not require replanting. It simply continued. The record of what mesquite sustained is not oral tradition alone. When Spanish missionaries entered the Sonoran Desert in the late 17th century, Eusebio Kino and his companions, writing carefully in their journals, they noted the presence of large communal harvests. They noted the trees. They described the flour, the fermented drinks made from the pods, the way entire communities organized themselves around the ripening cycle. Kino wrote of villages that were well fed in landscapes he described as otherwise barren. He did not understand what he was seeing. He recorded it, but he did not understand it. In the 1890s, during the sustained drought that devastated cattle ranching across the Southwest, the same communities that had always harvested mesquite survived, while newly arrived settlers starved or abandoned their homesteads and moved east. The contrast was documented. It was noted by agricultural surveyors. It was reported in the records of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, not as wisdom, but as a curiosity. During the First World War, when grain shipments to the American Southwest were disrupted and food prices spiked, federal researchers briefly investigated mesquite flour as a domestic supplement. Papers were written, small trials were conducted, then the war ended, grain returned, and the papers were filed. The pattern is always the same. Crisis creates interest. Stability returns. The interest disappears and the tree remains, unacknowledged, still rooted, still feeding whatever will accept it. The suppression of mesquite as a food system was not a conspiracy. It was something more mundane, and in some ways more devastating. It was a series of rational decisions made within a system that had no language for what mesquite offered. By the 1880s, cattle ranching had become the dominant economic logic of the American Southwest. Grassland was the resource. Grass required water. Mesquite competed with grass for water, or so it was believed. The science was incomplete, often wrong, but the economic interest was clear. Mesquite was also unownable in the way that mattered to the emerging agricultural economy. It could not be patented. Its pods could not be stored at industrial scale without specialized knowledge. It grew where it chose to grow, not where it was planted. It reproduced on its own terms. It spread through cattle, ironically, who ate the pods and deposited the seeds across the range, which only deepened the anger of the ranchers who wanted it gone. By the 20th century, the United States government had formalized the campaign. The Soil Conservation Service, the Bureau of Land Management, state agricultural extension programs, all of them promoted mesquite eradication. Aerial spraying of 2,4,5-T and other herbicides was funded across millions of acres of Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. Root plows, enormous mechanical blades that severed root systems beneath the soil, were deployed. The Army Corps of Engineers participated in regional efforts. The tree that had fed 10,000 years of human life was reclassified as a weed. And a weed, in the logic of industrial land management, has no history. It has no use. It has only the wrong location. It was inconvenient, it was unmanageable, and so it had to go. The mesquite did not go. There is something worth sitting with at the end of this. The mesquite was not lost. It was present through every decade of its persecution. It watched the herbicide plains and put its roots down another foot. It watched the root plows and sent up new shoots from the severed crowns. It spread through the cattle that were brought to replace it, in a gesture that might seem like irony if trees had a sense of humor. It was not the knowledge of mesquite that disappeared. It was the willingness to look. What we call the loss of traditional knowledge is often not a loss in the botanical sense. The plants remain. The soils that sustained those plants remain, diminished but present. What is lost is the human layer, the accumulated observation, the seasonal memory, the songs that kept the knowledge alive when there were no books to hold it. That layer can be rebuilt, slowly, imperfectly, with humility. There are Oodom communities today reclaiming mesquite harvest as a cultural and health initiative. There are desert farmers in Tucson and El Paso grinding pods and selling flour at markets. There are agroforesters in Mexico and India studying precipice integration into dry land degraded systems with results that are promising and unremarkable at the same time. Unremarkable because the tree simply does what it has always done when left to its work. Nature does not require our acknowledgement to continue. It requires only that we stop actively destroying what we do not yet understand. The soil beneath the Sonoran Desert remembers. The roots remember. The seeds inside those pods, which can remain viable for decades in dry storage, are waiting, as they have always been waiting, for the conditions that allow them to begin again. The tree has patience we have not earned. It will outlast the systems that try to end it. It already has. If this archive matters to you, if recovering what was buried feels like necessary work, subscribe to Ancient Food Files. Every story here is one that survived against the odds of indifference. There are more to tell. There will always be more to tell.